Well, good morning and welcome to everybody. I am so glad that you are with us on this day when we begin a new series entitled Fearless, and we're going to make our way through an Old Testament book called Joshua. And here is why I am so excited about this at a very high level. And let me get there by asking you a question. And I believe that everybody here can answer this question, but our answers are not going to be the same. And your answer is not going to be the same as mine or maybe anybody else's. But, here we go. Here's the question. What are you afraid of? And in this world of ours, there are a lot of ways in which we could answer that question. We may well be facing something that circumstance-wise is overwhelming, that you and I, we don't have the resources to overcome it, but it is there nonetheless. And what are we to do in moments like that? And here's why I think this story of Joshua and all that goes along with it is so important, because sometimes even when we have hope and believe and trust in God, we may think, well, I believe there's a God, but He's the God of the hereafter, right? Well, He is the God of the hereafter, but you know what else He is? He's the God of the here and now. And so there may be circumstances that we face here, and we think, well, God is over there, and He's worried about those things someday, somewhere else. But the story of Joshua tells us, no. That in this world of ours, that as we journey together with God, He is with us. When I was thinking about Joshua and what the image of the story looks like, kind of from beginning to end, I saw this image a number of weeks ago, and I thought, yeah, kind of like that. You're in an interesting place, and you're facing something that is overwhelming, and is like, man, I don't have the strength, I don't have the capability, I don't have the resources, but here I am, nonetheless, in that place. And if you've ever felt in that place, there is all kinds of hope that is found in Joshua's story, because it's a story of real people in this real world of ours, facing insurmountable obstacles, wrestling with things they never thought they would encounter. And what they discover is, we're not on our own. God is with us. So let's try to get our bearings of where exactly we are. Sometimes, we jump into different books or places in the Bible and we're not sure exactly where we are. This spans a couple thousand years. So let me go all the way back to the beginning of time as the Bible describes it for us. God created this world, a perfect place, an environment. He put a man and a woman inside of a garden in that place. And one day they decided they were going to chart their own course. And so they did what God asked them not to do. Everything was available. He just asked them to keep one thing off limits. But they decided, no, He's keeping something from us. He's not for us. And so they stepped outside of that boundary, and it ushered in a condition called sin, which is a part of who we are and the world in which we live. The world is broken, and we are broken. And we experience the struggle of that day in and day out. Well, God was not just going to leave it that way. And a number of years later, He comes to a man named Abraham. And He says to Abraham, not because Abraham was better than everybody else, or not that Abraham had proven himself to be devout or serious or, just even focused on God. It was just simply because God chose him. And He chose him because he was going to go to work to redeem so much of what is broken in this world. And He comes to Abraham and He says, I'm going to make you a great nation. And the purpose of making him into a nation was so that as real people followed God, others could see who God was and what He was like and what He had for people. And it was an opportunity for God to just show the light of His love and His grace and His mercy and His power in this world of ours. Well, they become a people group, and eventually that people group becomes captive inside of another nation called Egypt, and they spend over 400 years in slavery there. And a lot of times the numbers get away from us. 400 years is a lot longer than the United States has even been around. It's a long time. And no doubt many people were wondering, did that mean anything? Was that going anywhere? Because all we're doing is being slaves and making bricks, and it's not easy. But then one day, God says, now's the time. And he comes to somebody named Moses, and he says to Moses, I'm going to choose you to be the leader of this effort to go and free my people, because now the time has come where I want to lead them toward this land that I have promised to them, so they can become established as a nation, so there could be a light that shines all around to who God is and what he's inviting everybody to be a part of. And so Moses goes down there, and he's all, insecure about himself, and God says, I'll be with you, and he performs these mighty acts which demonstrate God's superiority over the gods of Egypt and all of that. And finally, Pharaoh surrenders and says, okay, you can go. And to get a little bit of bearings of where we're talking about here, Egypt is all the way on the left there. And so they get led out, and that was a miraculous event. They come to the Red Sea, and Pharaoh changes his mind and says, no, I want to bring those slaves back. We lost all this free labor. And so he sends his army out. They got the Red Sea in front of them. They got Pharaoh's army behind them, and they are between an army and a hard place. And what does God do? He parts the sea, and they walk through on dry land. They go down to a place at the bottom of this map called Mount Sinai. And there's where Moses goes to the top of the mountain and he meets with God. He comes back down with the 10 Commandments. What the people saw was this amazing light display, and they hear the thunder, and it's shaking the ground, and there's a little sense of awe and respect and just a little bit of fear mixed in there. Who is Moses meeting with? And it's none other than the living and the true God. And you would think, okay, we're all set. God has said, you are my people. Why? Is it because we were so good? No, it's because the same thing that happened with Abraham, he has now reaffirmed. I'm going to do it. And I'm choosing you. It's not because you're so good. It's because of who I am. And so now comes the time to make their way up to the promised land, and it's kind of here at the top of this map there. And they get to the border of that, and as a strategy for getting ready to go into that land, they send 12 spies to check it out. And 10 of them come back, and they go, you know what, we can't do this. They're giants, we're like grasshoppers. There's no way that we could do this. 2 of them come back and say, we can and we should do this. And maybe it was just simply they got outvoted. Maybe it was because fear can spread like a virus. But as a nation, the people say, nope, not going to do it. And so you know what happens for the next 40 years? There is a wandering through the wilderness for the next 40 years. And pretty much all of that generation dies off. And then here they come again. And they're making their way to the border of that promised land. What will happen this time? And just like if you're on a ledge wrestling with a grizzly bear, the future is uncertain, to say the least, right? What is going to happen this time as we try to accomplish what God has in store for us? And in circumstances like that seem uncertain, that seem overwhelming. We've been here before and we didn't make it. What's going to happen this time? Here's what God says in the first chapter of Joshua. We're going to unpack each of these in a little bit. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. The word strong has this image that comes along with it when you twist ropes together so they gain additional strength. And when you do that, you're not just adding, 1 plus 1 plus 1, that equals 3, but it actually multiplies the strength of that. And that's what God's talking about on this day. Be strong. A strength even beyond yourself. What is being courageous? It has the idea of moving forward, conquering, being victorious in the face of whatever it is that you do face, in spite of your circumstances. And so let me ask you this question though. So God shows up and says to Joshua, who's now become the leader, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous. Why would God need to say this, and why would he need to say it 3 times? And I think the likely conclusion is because Joshua is not strong and courageous. And rather than just saying, hey, get your act together and suck it up and, do your job, what we're going to discover is that each time God connects a reason to each time that he says these words. It's not the only time in the Bible you hear these words too. And if you want to do an interesting study, check out whenever God comes to a group of people and says that, and he says, be strong and courageous. And every time there is something that lies in front of them that is overwhelming, that is insurmountable, something that they could not do on their own with their own resources. And God invites them nonetheless. And we say, oh, okay, for why in Joshua's circumstance would he need to be strong and courageous? What is he facing? And my guess is what he's facing is what some people here are facing too. First of all, he's facing past failure. You know, we talked about those 12 spies that went into the land. One of the two that came back and said, we can do this, was none other than Joshua himself. And so Joshua said, you know, we can accomplish this. This is something that God has called us to do. Let's do it. And for whatever reason, that advice was not taken. And so Joshua can look back, hey, I was here 40 years ago. And I gave a direction and it wasn't taken. And here we are again. And if the people didn't believe me then, why are they going to believe me now? What has changed in all that time? The people are no less small than they were before. I've been here and it didn't turn out right. I've been here and I failed. I don't know if anybody here, you know, who's in the dad category as it's Father's Day. I don't know if this is how it'll play out at your house, but here's my guess, you know, in a little bit when I head home and sometime this afternoon. I'm going to get these awesome cards from my 2 kids. And I have a son-in-law too, so 3 kids. And so there's going to be these wonderful cards, and they're going to say really nice things in them. But do you know what I know? Is that there's more than that. And my guess, every father here today, if you could rewind the clock a little bit, you would do things differently. You might say things differently. You might make different decisions. Anybody ever dealt with any past failure in whatever form it may come? And when we have that recognition, boy, it can make the future look real uncertain. Because we think, man, I've been here before, or I've tried before, and it hadn't always turned out well. Something else Joshua is facing is challenging circumstances. They're coming up to the Jordan River, and that is the boundary of the land. And for most of the year, you and I could almost jump across the Jordan River. You know, it's just this trickle of a stream, basically, but there's one particular time of year, it doesn't last for all that long, where it's at flood stage and it gets about 2 miles wide. Guess when they are coming to cross the Jordan? Right during flood stage. And so there's a circumstance in front of them. How do we do that? And once they cross the Jordan, even if we can make that, you know what's waiting on the other side? There's a whole group of people over there. They're not just going to put up a for sale sign when we get there. Oh, you guys are here? Okay, we'll just, go our separate ways. There are going to be some people, and there's going to be some battles that are waiting for them on the other side of that. Joshua is also facing overwhelming responsibility. Estimates are at this point, this nation that he is leading is give or take about 2 million people. And so he knows the responsibility that comes with it. The decisions that I make and what we choose to do is not just going to affect me, it's going to affect a whole lot of other people. And I was, a kind of a leader when Moses was the man and he was large and in charge. But, the buck stopped with him. But all of a sudden now the buck stops with Joshua, and that's just a whole different level. And now you can't point at anybody else. It's you, Joshua, next man up. And the next man up is you. But guess what? You got a responsibility for a whole lot more than you. And one more thing that Joshua's facing is major change. Moses was the man. Moses was the guy that God tapped on the shoulder. He has led them for 40 years. But now Moses is gone. We just had his funeral. And that is light years different. And all of a sudden, here you go. It's yours. What are you going to do with it? And Joshua's responsibility level has changed. His involvement level has changed. So much has changed. The one to whom the people looked for so long is gone. Anybody dealing with some challenging circumstances? A river that seems insurmountable, something you cannot cross just with your own capabilities. Responsibilities beyond your own, beyond yourself. And the future outcome of all of that is uncertain. You don't know how it's going to turn out, but you know that there's a weight on you because it's going to impact some others. And also maybe you've gone through a time of major change. Because in one way or another, this world of ours continues to dish out what it has for so long. And if you're in any of those places or all of them combined, Joshua's your story. Because it's not just some ideas about who God is as the God of the here and after. He is that. But we also discover that He is the God of the here and now. And He is going to go with Joshua wherever he goes. So let's jump into chapter 1. After the death of Moses, the Lord's servant, the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant. He said, Moses, my servant, is dead. Therefore, the time has come for you to lead these people, the Israelites, across the Jordan River into the land that I am giving them. I promise you what I promised Moses. Wherever you set foot, you will be on land that I have given you. From the Negev wilderness into the south of Lebanon mountains in the north, from the Euphrates River to the east of the Mediterranean Sea in the west, including all the land of the Hittites. And then here comes the first one. Be strong and courageous. And each and every time God says that, He's going to attach a reason or something to it upon which Joshua can get strong and he can be courageous, moving forward in spite of his circumstances. God's going to give him a why and a reason why Joshua can be strong and courageous. So, be strong and courageous. Why? For you are the one who will lead these people to possess all the land I swore to their ancestors I would give them. And so here he is, right on the other side of Moses' death and his funeral. And he's saying to the new leader, you know what? You be strong, you be courageous. Why? Because you are going to accomplish the task. Here's what God says to Joshua on that day. I have a purpose for your life. Do you find it a little strange why God would say to Joshua right out of the chute when this book starts, hey, my servant Moses is dead? Why would God say something to Joshua that Joshua already clearly knows? I know he's gone. We just had his funeral. Why would you say that, God? Could it be that Joshua attached his sense of what the future held, of what was in store for him and everybody else, to a person and not to the God who had made the promise in the first place? Because all the way back at the beginning, when God was leading in this direction, it wasn't about any individual. It included them, but it wasn't about them. But so often what happens in this world is we can make the same mistake that I believe Joshua has made, saying, well, Moses was the guy and you picked him and he was supposed to accomplish it. Now he's gone. What are we supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? It's just me. Moses was the man. You know, there are a lot of different ways in this world in which we may have a dream of something that is going to happen, but something dies along the way. And sadly, in this world, sometimes people die. And there is a time and a place to grieve that because it matters. Absolutely, it matters. But could it be that maybe we have attached any sense of a bright future to all of that, and yeah, it'll never be the same? But what God is saying to Joshua on this day, yep, that happened, but you know what? I got somewhere for you to go. I have something for you to do. There is a purpose for you to be here. And even when Moses died, nothing of God died. He was still the same God. In this world, sometimes marriages die. And maybe any sense of a bright future that we had, we attach to that. And we think on the other side of that not working out, well, I guess, that was my best shot to experience, whatever good was ahead. That's not what Joshua hears that day. God says to you, just like he did to him, I have a purpose for your life. Yeah, there's a time and a place to grieve that because it matters. But your hope for the future did not end there. Because our hope and our anticipation is not just tied to things that come and go, but to the God who is eternal. Maybe in your life, your kids are not headed in the direction that you hoped and dreamed they would. And there's a time and a place to deal with that and to wrestle with that. And you might think, well, there goes my sense of a bright future down that road. God says, I have a purpose for your life. There's some guys that a lot of times will attach, their sense of purpose to what they do. And maybe if all of a sudden their job ends, or maybe they reach the retirement years and we think, well, there goes that, because all that I felt that was important in this world was attached to that. And God says to you, I have a purpose for your life. You might say, well, when does my purpose from God's perspective come to an end? And here's the spiritual answer to that. Right after you take your final breath. That's when it ends. Because as long as you are here, God has a purpose for you. And I wonder, in this world, how many times we attach what should only be attached to the eternal God, to things or to people or to situations or relationships that are very important. But when it comes to an ultimate sense of who we are and where all this is going, there's an eternal God that says, come what may, I have a purpose for you. There's a reason for you to be here. And so courage requires a call to action, because a lot of times when we have attached our hopes for a good and positive future to something that may come or may go, we might be paralyzed on the other side of that, and we say, well, I guess, I might as well just, take up a position here on the sidelines and let everybody else do it. You cannot get strong without lifting something. You cannot get courageous without taking some steps forward. And so it is not an invitation to become disengaged. Rather, it is an opportunity and an invitation to become engaged in what it is that God has put you here to do. But no matter where you find yourself, no matter what you face, no matter what's happened, no matter what has died, no matter what has happened, the same God says these words to you today. I have a purpose for your life. And it goes on in chapter 1. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the instructions that Moses gave you. Do not deviate from them, turning either to the right or the left. That, by the way, is not a political statement, all right? And some people try to make that, you should be a registered independent. Our categories don't exactly exist at this time, so let's just take it, easy with all of that. Then you will be successful in everything that you do. Study this book of instruction. He's talking about the Bible continually. Meditate on it day and night so that you will be sure to obey everything that is written in it. Only then will you prosper and succeed in all that you do. And here's what God is saying to Joshua on that day. Look, Joshua, you're not on your own. You might think all of a sudden, I got a giant weight of responsibility that's just been dumped into my lap. I didn't really ask for it, but here it is. And now I just got to figure this out. And hopefully I'll pick right, because there's a whole lot of other people that are going to, be the recipients of that one way or the other. And what God says is, you're not on your own. That I've given you a direction. Courage needs a compass. It needs a heading, and what God says to him is, I've not left you all on your own. That there are principles to guide you, there are commands to direct you. And so basically, Joshua, I have principles for you to live by. You don't have to figure this out all by yourself. That God is with you, not just in a general spiritual sense, but God has given you a sense of reality about Him, about what this world is about what He longs to see unfold in this world of ours, how He wants to accomplish redemption and heal so much of what is hurting. You don't have to just figure that out by yourself. But you know where we need to turn our attention? To the Word that God has given us, to the Bible. So let me ask you this question. What role does that play in your life? And if I had one just practical encouragement of what we can do with that, and maybe you've already done this, maybe you haven't, but that we would make a commitment to spend regular time with God. And we say, well, how long? And you know what? Here's the main thing. If we get there, let's just start there. And a lot of people do that early in the morning. And sometimes we may read things and we go, well, I'm not sure what that has to do with anything. I'm not even sure I know. But here's the picture that is given along with what he said. Meditate on it day and night. And the image there, remember, this is an agrarian culture from long ago. Has anybody ever seen a cow chewing its cud? It's disgusting. You know, they're chewing this, they've swallowed something, regurgitated it in their mouth, and now they're just chewing it. And there's saliva dripping out of the sides of their mouth. It is disgusting. And yet that picture is beautiful. Because what it means, and maybe in our day we would say it this way, let it marinate. Sounds much more like a Father's Day thing, right? With a grill and everything like that, yeah. Let it marinate. To get that influence inside of who you are. You are not on your own, and we do not have to figure all this stuff out all by ourselves. Because sometimes we may think, well, how am I supposed to choose and know what's right and wrong? Guess what? You're not on your own. How am I supposed to deal with realities that are going to impact people that I care about very much? And it doesn't always go the best way. You're not on your own. But really, I think the question is, are you going to lean in the direction that God has given to us? Because that's the invitation He's given. Marinate on it. Let it seep into who you are. And it is just a thing that doesn't happen overnight and quickly. It is something that just is a regular building habit that can change so much for the better. One more time, God says, be strong and courageous. No one will be able to stand against you as long as you live, for I will be with you as I was with Moses. Those words have to be electric to Joshua because he probably thought, yeah, Moses was the guy and God did some incredible things. Now you're saying that you are going to be with me just like you were with him? Yeah. So there were these amazing things that finally led Pharaoh to surrender and set us free. You're going to be with me? Yeah. There was a time the Red Sea opened up and we went through on dry ground, and that was you, and you're going to be with me? Yeah. There was a time we had nothing to drink. We were out of options, and all of a sudden you caused water to pour out of a rock. You did that. That was about you and not us, and you're going to be with me? Yeah. There was a time we had nothing to eat, and you just poured food from heaven called manna, which I love it. You know what it means? It's a Hebrew word, manna. It means, what is it? People say, what is it? And God was miraculously feeding them from heaven. And what an amazing picture, right, of this reality that probably in theory we understand it, that you know what? Every day the provisions that we need and the rescue that we so desperately desire, where does it come from? It's not in here. But it does come from the God who is with us. And on this day, he says to Joshua, make no mistake about it. The same God who is doing all of that is now with you. And if you have put your hope and your trust in Jesus, guess what? Those words are true for you. Come what may. I will not fail you or abandon you. And then in verse 9, this is my command, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged. Why? For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Wherever I go, wherever you go. You go into uncharted territory that you never desired. Somebody has left your life. Maybe something has left your life. Maybe your hope of a good physical future, all of a sudden there is a test result that says something different. And it does not change the reality of what God says on that day. Come what may. God says, I'll be with you. God says, I have you, no matter what. And it's the no matter what part that gives us the struggle. Because I think on the one hand, many times we can say, yeah, I know God is good and all of that, and that's awesome. But why does there need to be all that difficulty? Many years later, Jesus said these words, and I think such a picture of this whole chapter. Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. But that's not the end of the verse. He says, but take heart, because I, Jesus, have overcome the world. And to somebody who's got a whole bunch of new responsibility on this day, God says that same thing. You know what? I will never leave you. Does that mean on the other side of that day, all of a sudden it's going to get real easy? Nope. There's a whole bunch of battles ahead. There's some internal dynamics that get very funky. There's some issues inside of the heart of the people who claim to love God. There's some issues that are happening all around them. God says, I'm not going to let you go. Come what may. I got you. An interesting point about Joshua that really is no coincidence leans in Jesus' direction. You say, well, this is thousands of years before Jesus. That's right. The name Joshua is a Hebrew word. It means the Lord saves. Well, many years later, culture changes and the Greeks come through and the Greek language takes over in that part of the world, and somebody named Jesus is born. The name Jesus is a Greek word. The Hebrew word for it is Joshua. The Lord saves. And one of the ancient predictions in Jesus' coming goes something like this. Who is it that's going to be born? This is going to be none other than God who is with us. And one day, God himself not only said these words and invited people to trust that. One day, God himself set foot in this world and showed us what that meant, what it was like for God to live in real life in a broken world. And ultimately, Jesus did exactly what his name says. He saved us in an ultimate sense. That's where a relationship with God begins. It's not our doing. It's his doing. The Lord saves. But he has thrown wide open an invitation to put our hope and our trust in him. And inside of that relationship, it doesn't mean that it's going to be, just a smooth and easy road. And God doesn't always invite us to choose and follow the path of least resistance. Sometimes the right thing is not the easy thing. And that's why we got to be strong and courageous. Well, how do we get strong and courageous? We don't just muster that up inside of ourselves. How do we do that? By knowing that the eternal God has a purpose for us. We're not here by accident, not one person. So pursue God with everything you have. You might say, well, how do I know what my purpose is? You just begin to follow him. Begin to follow him. And a lot of times he leads us in the context of a relationship with him. He doesn't give us MapQuest directions that tell us exactly when to turn. He invites us to follow him. He also has not left us by ourselves. We've got some principles to follow, because we have the opportunity to have a compass heading that leads us in the direction that's a good one. And also God says, how you get strong and courageous? To know that the eternal God He's got you. And he's not going to let you go, no matter what. So what is courage? What does it look like in real life? It is moving forward with faith in the face of fear. It's not the absence of fear. It's recognizing there are real things that happen in this world of ours, but I will not let that paralyze me or take me to the sidelines. I will move forward in the direction that God has for me, because he's not just the God of the hereafter. He's the God of the here and now, and he has promised to be with me in this. But there is somewhere good he is taking me. And one day, Jesus put it this way, that he is leading us to being fully alive because he's a good shepherd. And so he's still leading people. So let me ask you this question again as we wrap this up. What are you afraid of? There are real things in this world that happen that can be fear-inducing. But there's a purpose that God has for you. Principles to live by. And a promise that he won't let you go. He's not going to leave you. He's not going to abandon you. He is the God who is with us. I'm going to invite you to bow your heads together with me. God, so many things in this world of ours come and go. We think of cultures and languages and practices and all kinds of different things. And yet, there's so much about this world that is the same as it's always been, that's broken, and that we experience the challenge and the heartache and the struggle of that day in and day out. And God, help us to not only know, but also to bring in alignment with our faith, the things that we believe about you, that there is going to be a connection between that and the everyday life that we live. Those two things are not separated from each other, but the goodness that you have given to us and the reality of who you are can change so much of the course of our lives from day to day. So God, lead us in the direction that draws us closer to you and helps us to experience more of what you long for us to know. And we ask along the way that we would know that it's your doing and not ours. That you are the great and eternal and powerful good God who longs to lead us to being fully alive in you. And we ask you for that direction, for your name's sake and not our own. And so we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.